Are you there, Elliot?
Oh, hello.
Welcome to the Hackaday podcast. My name's Mike Szczys. I'm editor-in-chief of Hackaday.
Hey, I'm Elliot Williams. I'm managing editor of Hackaday.
This is episode 125. Today, two Linux users are talking about Windows 11. We look at pop bottle filament, old phones with modern guts, and eavesdropping in radio frequency. We have our first 10 finalists in the 2021 Hackaday Prize, Elliot. This was the Rethink Displays part of the contest.
I love this one. I love displays. I'm a total sucker, and I couldn't help but notice that there were not one, but two volumetric displays in the top 10.
Yeah, and at least one of those we talked about before, the one that had like the 10 by 10 grid of ultrasonic transducers on like pointed up and pointed down. And then it would take like a little piece of polystyrene and move it around really fast and then do like a POV with different colored LEDs to color the ball differently so it can draw shapes in space of different colors.
And that one's my favorite for the insane physics that goes on behind the scenes. But for raw, like stunning volumetric 3D goodness, the other one, the VVD project, really takes the cake. And this one has a sheet that goes up and down and then lines up kind of a 2D image on the screen as it's going up, and it stacks them up and down like a 3D printer would make things in 3D, basically.
I actually saw a version of this back in 2019 when I was at the Rome Maker Faire. It was made by the same guy who made that 3D printed like dust buster. I don't know if you remember that thing.
Okay.
But this was kind of like a more bare bones version of it. And I think a smaller version. This is a larger version, and the flapping part is kind of like down in a black box that's open on the top. And I just look at it, I'm like, that would be the coolest cocktail cabinet arcade game.
Oh, dude. The cool thing about VVD is that it's pretty accessible. The uncool thing is that it relies strongly on these essentially rubber bands that hold the floating membrane to its motor arms and provide a little stretch there. And he says they wear out every couple of days.
Oh, no.
So, like, can you imagine you're doing your 3D display and it goes whoop, 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 whoop.
Yeah, the thing that's so cool about these, though, is I don't think that the viewer's perspective matters at all. Like, you can look at it from any side, any
totally.
elevation.
Of course.
Yeah, and like that's cool. So it's like real 3D.
Yeah, it's like real 3D. Both of these are projects where it's actually like literally moving something around in space and illuminating it to make the 3D image. That's really awesome.
There's a ton of other interesting ones, though, too. So do go and look at it. There's an infrared mirror that instead of mirroring the visible light coming off of your body, it mirrors the heat, the infrared light that's coming off of your body. There's some kind of holographic wavefront cylinder display that's trying to take like a big, I get the feeling that's like if you touch your middle fingers and your thumbs together, that kind of size of circle of perspex that's really, really clear, trying to use that as a display that you shoot up from the bottom and then it appears in the cross section of the perspex and from any side you can see it.
Whoa.
There's a indoor air quality sensor that is e-ink, and so it's one of those like persistent on the wall sort of thing. There's a mental health chatbot. There's an interesting take on AR glasses that seems to be reflecting lasers into your eyeballs, which sounds crazy, but we've actually seen, like serious industry saying that they're going to do that exact thing. I think Maya wrote an article on that. These are awesome. Go look at them. There's also, 160 or 70 other entries in that round as well.
All right, you know what it's time for?
This is a journey into sound.
What's that sound?
What's that sound?
What is that sound?
Have you listened to the sound yet this week, Mike?
No, did you upload the sound?
I did. Go open up your folder and give it a listen and tell me what you think.
Navigating.
Whoa.
Huh.
What do you think? Wild guess?
Well, it sounds like one of those magic ball typewriters, but it's not because it's way too uniformed. So it's got to be a printing mechanism of some type, and I just don't know what it is.
Interesting. I can't say yes or no. I have to be as mystical as I can here.
Yeah, well, you shouldn't tell me. I'd prefer to be in the dark, and that would give me some time to think about it too. And then maybe next week I'll get it.
Sounds good. I don't know if it's too big a hint, but it has been featured on Hackaday before.
Oh,
So
really?
those of you who remember every sound that's ever played in any video ever on Hackaday will remember this one.
Oh, this makes me think that it's
You got it. You absolutely got it. I'm going to have to bleep that out in post. Good job.
Yay! I got something! Yay!
Mike, you get a t-shirt.
No, but that makes a lot of sense on the rhythm of the sound that you hear. Like if you think about how this thing operates, then I don't want to say words because it'll be too much of a clue.
Good. Well, we'll see who out there can name that sound. Good luck to everybody, and we will pick out the right answers next week, draw for a t-shirt, and send that off to you.
You'll have the 5th as ever Hackaday podcast t-shirt if you can get this right.
Oh, and those of you who were still in suspense over whether Mikey got back to us, he did. We sent him his t-shirt last week. And congratulations to Things, who deciphered the DTMF tones from 2 weeks ago where I bleeped out Dan Maloney. You got it. I, not very inventively, typed in Hackaday. I'll have to type in something clever next time.
Hey, man.
Yes,
what
sir.
if you had a Geiger counter, but instead of counting Geigers, it counted radio frequency?
Okay.
That's the gist behind this one, which was featured in an article Danny Conradi wrote called Listen to the RF Around You. Maker Wolf built this really awesome handheld sensor that you can kind of point at anything around you and it will look at whatever RF signals it can find and then turn them into audio. And I must say, the audio is quite pleasing. Like it's not just like annoying or loud beeps. It actually gives you a good sense of context.
I have a kind of a cheap all-band radio that I use for listening to noise pollution sources with, but he takes this one step further and makes a nice case. He throws in a nice demodulator and he uses a directional antenna.
Yeah, it's got this RF broadband antenna that he laid out on his circuit board. I think that's his design, right?
That is a Vivaldi antenna. A Vivaldi's an awesome antenna. It's kind of this logarithmically widening cone-shaped thing. You can make them on PCBs. It's reasonably directional, but super broadband. It goes over a very wide range of frequencies, which is what he wants here, because he doesn't know what he wants to listen to. He just wants to listen to whatever electromagnetic radiation is coming from over there. Anyway, Vivaldi antennas are awesome for this kind of exploratory radio stuff. I'll throw 2 links in the show notes to Vivaldi antenna designs, because you can make one cheap as chips out of a PCB.
See, now, I think this has a very Ghostbusters vibe to it.
Yeah, right?
Like it could be something that Egon came up with, and it's got, in addition to, a sound coming out the side, it's got a little green, yellow, red tree of LEDs to show you the signal intensity. Crazy things are Baby Monitor in his house is putting out a ton of RF, and it's not just the transmitter, the receiver is too. So I'm going to say that did not pass FCC
I wonder what that's about. Is it two-way? Does it have a...
Yeah, because usually there's a button that you can press to talk to the monitor side, the camera.
Yeah,
side
so what
of
if
them.
it's a two-way Baby Monitor, and that
But
is
why-
actually what it does?
Why be transmitting when you're not talking?
Because the other side, no idea. No idea.
The other thing I really like about this project is just seeing the workflow that is used to develop it. So it is simulated in Falstad first, and then there's a really awesome photo of it breadboarded up. So it's still the portable handheld thing, but instead of a nice little circuit board inside, there's just a full-size breadboard with jumper wires going everywhere, which is pretty cool. The sounds itself I was like, how is he doing that? So the There's an AD8318 demodulator chip that's used to condition the signals that are coming in from the antenna. And then I think there's a 555 in there to make the audio. Is that right? Yeah, there it is. So there's a square wave generator from a 555 timer, which people usually want to see. And then just a simple LM386 for the audio amplification. It's a cool project. It made me smile when I saw the video and saw it was tested. And if you're ever in the area of trying to track down like what's going on with my Wi-Fi in this part of the house, or why do things go crazy every once in a while with my speakers and I can hear interference in them, trying to track down where it's coming from, this could be a useful tool. Oh, I was going to talk about this UK thing.
You can do it real quick. Why would you ever want to track down radio interference, Mike?
Yeah, well, for instance, if your entire village's internet goes out at about 7 a.m. every morning, as happened in England back in September of last year, you might be able to track it down to the television shine that an old malfunctioning CRT machine is putting out every time someone turns it on to watch the morning news. We'll put that link into the show notes.
That's a fun story. All right, coming up, I have a twofer of jamming new electronics into old cell phone cases. One of these projects is really super involved and very refined, and the other is kind of just to cut stuff up and hack it, but they both come to great results. First up is Trevor Atama's LoRa Messenger in Nokia's shell. He pulls out the motherboard from an old Nokia E63 phone. And this is a phone that's in kind of that BlackBerry style, like it's a candy bar phone, it's got a keyboard underneath it. And here he is leaving as much as he possibly can in there. So that is the screen and the keyboard and the joysticks and stuff. But he is pulling out the motherboard and replacing it with one that has an STM32 microcontroller on it and an ISM band LoRa radio. So what this does is it turns it into an encrypted text messenger. And he, along the way, used it's ST's GUI library to make some really fantastic looking menus and stuff. This looks like a professional product from some kind of alternative past.
Yeah, especially the circuit board. I mean, I looked at the circuit board like this, and I'm like, that shows you some skills to be able to, one, just map out the precise shape of that, and then the routing around the chip looks like it's a bear to deal with.
That's some tight wiring everywhere, and all the passives are small. You have to remember, this has to fit all of these brains and an extra radio into the shell of a fairly small commercial cell phone, and that's kind of its appeal, is you have this great case and interface. And I think the same thing hit Benedict from Befinitive when he made his. Jenny List wrote this project up in an article called "A Phone That Old Shouldn't Be Running Android." And what Befinitive did was cram the guts of a Go, W5 smartwatch. So it's a smartwatch that can run Android. He pulled it out of his case, he trimmed it all apart, and he wedged it into a Sony CMD Z5, which is an old flip phone from kind of the peak of the trend to make cell phones as small as they possibly could be. Not only is it flip to fold in half, but it's pretty darn small. I think this is probably the one that they used in Zoolander as the prop. Like, this is the cell phone for ants here. And it's just big enough when you pull its guts out to cram the guts of a smartwatch and its LCD in. It uses the touchscreen instead of the keypad. He actually hasn't figured out a way to integrate the keypad into it yet, but my guess is he will.
So, that's pretty cool. And then you could really beef up the capacity of the battery because this is so much bigger than a smartwatch.
Actually, I wonder how much more space he has than a smartwatch. He broke the screen a little bit trying to wedge it in there. He was trying to pull the front off the screen and do some other hacks on it. So I think it wasn't as easy as you would imagine to cram this into that little tiny phone body. I think both of these together just kind of go to show how older industrial design for things that are nice and fit in your pocket really well can be expanded on and fixed up and modernized, even though, maybe their guts on the inside aren't worth keeping anymore.
Elliot, I know you're not a huge fan of my hyperbole when I say that my mind was blown,
That's
but
kind of a cliche, isn't it?
I looked at this one and it blew my mind. I mean, really, how can you look at this and not have to pick your jaw up off the floor?
This was some amazing mechanical clockwork.
Yeah, so this is the work of François Junod. It is mechanical sculptures, automata, art pieces. I think we need to make up a new word for it. Certainly at the height of automata building. The one that's headlined on the article that Danny Conradi wrote called The Incredible Mechanical Artistry of François Junod is a man walking around in a circular pattern. How big is this? It's the size of an extra large pizza pie. And,
Exactly.
the purpose of this is to show off the mechanics, which is great because then you get to see all the awesome gearing and everything. The man that's walking is like a stamped out of steel sheets, but has, several layers. Like the arms are on different layers from the head and the body and the legs, and you get to see a 4-bar linkage moving the legs very lifelike, and the arms swing opposite, and then even like the head bobs a little bit with each step. And as you walk around the outside, all of a sudden, like this pneumatic part of it starts blowing a little like ping pong ball up, and it's in a cage, but it's just keeping it supported there. And then bells start to play, and then you get to hear a song on a whistle. And then as he's walking by these holes, these little metal mushrooms pop up, which gives the title of this art piece, which is Le Champignon.
Champignon.
I'm not making fun of French. I'm making fun of my ability to speak with the accurate pronunciation.
Le Champignonneur.
Yeah, there you go. Elliot's got it, which
Merci
is
bien.
the mushroom. And it's totally worth looking at this. Oh, did I mention that this is all hand cranked? So you, at the beginning, you hand crank to like raise some weights up like you would in a grandfather clock, and then you press a button and gravity takes over. For all of this, there's a really beautiful flyball governor in the middle of it that regulates the speed. And is there anything not perfect about this? The answer is no.
It is absolutely crazy. And this is done for a watchmaking museum. And it uses like all of those watchmaker tricks. So there's like, there's these nice brass pieces in there, and they all have that like finished with round, shiny wear mark circles thing that watch gear has. Like the videos of him assembling these things, he's got gloves on so he doesn't leave fingerprints anywhere. Everything shines, everything gleams, the gears all mesh perfectly.
And then this isn't even the one that really impressed me as much as the next one, which is La Fille Ondine, the water fairy. And it looks fake. I mean, it's so perfect that you have to assume there's some camera trickery in it. But you want to watch this video. So it's a water fairy sitting on a lily pad, and the flower in the middle of the lily pad opens up, and there's a butterfly in it. And I didn't even notice that during this, around the outside of this circular sculpture about the size of a dinner plate, there's a ladybug going along. But the water fairy's movements, I don't know if you saw the movie Hugo. It's about an automata, like a little boy that's brought to life, and it's, all movie magic as far as I know. The lifelike movements that you would expect from a CGI android are happening right in front of your face. And then the second 2/3 of this video, you get to see the insides of all of that. So you get to see like the mechanisms that are moving each part of the fairy, and just wow.
My favorite part of this one is actually the lily pad leaf itself, which looks like it's made out of, I don't know, it might even be a bunch of plastic wedges, but it's on some kind of support underneath that's also part of the automata. And so it gets waves in it. And so it's kind of rippling around like it's on the surface of the water. And that is just a fantastic effect.
We should play a little bit of the bird song. There's another video that wasn't featured on the article.
Mes sources d'inspiration.
And so when you hear that bird tweeting, you also get to see the cam that is cut out. So each time there's supposed to be a bird's note, it just cuts a little tooth out of it. And that's just like the simplest possible part of one of these. And so you wonder, how do you get these godlike automata skills? Well, Francois's best friend's father was Michel Bertrand, a world-famous automaton maker. And so when Francois got done with a mechanical engineering apprenticeship, he then studied one-on-one with this seasoned automaton maker and repairer while he was also going to fine arts school. So like all of the moons aligned at the same time for this person to have amazing skills. But it shows you like the height of, like Elliot said, like clockmaking or watchmaking, the height of like that mechanical art. And, thankfully, some people are still carrying it on at just a stratospheric scale.
There was one part in the fairy video where it's showing kind of his notes where he was planning for this. And watching that is where it struck me that all of this video is about the assembling it and the building it and the machining it and stuff and the art behind it. The craziest part for me is that you could design this on paper and that you could like figure out, okay, I need this linkage here and it needs to be exactly this long and this piece fits to this piece and this piece fits to this piece because it's got 600, 800, a million pieces as far as I know. And to be able to sketch that out dimensionally, you have to be able to keep a lot of that in your head. Coming up next, tiny operating system for tiny computer. This is another French project, Aerobase. This is the Zardos operating system, and it's for an AVR mega computer, but it gets its power by blending itself with the old, I guess now obsolete French Minitel. And you can't talk about one without the other. But we'll start with the AVR, which is the operating system here. It talks to a mouse. It has some memory and some stuff like that, and speaks UART to this Minitel device. And Minitel it's the weirdest thing. It was like the French pre-internet dial-up 1200 baud like teletype machine, but it was connected to a national like BBS infrastructure. And so you could do totally useful things, like you could do online banking over Minitel before there was an internet, and you could, check on your plane flight, you could buy train tickets, et cetera, all through this dial-up service. And the weirdest thing about Minitel kind of culturally for France is that it was so successful so early, and this is from the 80s, that a lot of French people will complain that it held them back in their transition to the internet because they already had this like significantly more successful kind of dial-up BBS system going on. Anyway, the cool thing here is that the Minitel provides the screen, the keyboard, the graphics rendering, and the AVR just sends it the characters it needs to draw on the screen using the old Minitel standard protocol. So it's a really neat blend of kind of, I don't know, it's almost like he wrote an operating system for the AVR Mega to work as a server for his Minitel terminal. And it does crazy things like has some graphics drawing apps. Of course, it's ASCII graphics because the thing can only print out characters. He has some games. It's got a menuing system. It's really a cute hack.
I mean, it's just begging to be at the Vintage Computer Festival, right? Like, what a great exhibit it would be to come up and be able to show, what you've done with this system. I also really enjoyed, obviously the Minitel didn't have a mouse. So
right.
Seeing how that was implemented, and I never really thought about it before, but yeah, just, rewriting the registers for the cursor location is a really easy way to integrate a mouse. So you just have to watch it for which direction, how fast it's moving, and then just change those registers.
I don't usually think of an AVR AT Mega chip as being like a powerful brain, but he has it doing the heavy lifting here for the Minitel. And I think that's really cool. There must have been a few million Minitel terminals in France. The service finally got shut down in 2012, so not all that long ago, actually, considering the internet had dominated the rest of the world by then. And these things must be out there. We need to get a demo scene on old Minitel terminals? Or like, what can we do with them?
Well, I think this is what you can do with them because you've lost the backend that makes them really usable.
Exactly. And so that means that we hackers have to provide new and glorious backends for them. And I'm happy to see that Arrowbase did that. I'm also super happy to see his shout out to my favorite best worst movie. This thing is called Zardos OS, but that references the horrible 1974 sci-fi fantasy, I don't know what movie, Zardoz. Have you ever seen Zardoz?
It sounds familiar. It's not Jodorowsky movie, is it?
If you'd seen it, you would know it. It is high concept, but it is like horrible. It is a disastrous failure. It has Sean Connery in it.
Oh,
It's
I know of it because I've seen that outfit where he's got the bandoliers of
Correcto. It's got all sorts of
Famous.
like mid 70s horrible. Let's see. It was done by John Boorman, who did Deliverance just before this, which was kind of artistically and success wise a total smash. And then he had carte blanche to do whatever he wanted. And so he wanted to make this like, there was like an immortal upper class and like a dumb lower class, but then they would keep reproducing. And so there was this middle class of exterminators who would have to kill them to keep them from overpopulating the world. It's like this really grotesque class versus, it's really fantastic idea. And then it's just a horrible failure because it's a horrible movie. So you really need to go watch it because it's either the best worst movie I've ever seen or the worst best movie I've ever seen.
I don't know, the last time you recommended a horrible movie, I went and tried to watch it. I didn't make it through it, and that was Eraserhead.
You
Yeah.
might not make it through Zardoz either, but you should try.
Zardoz speaks to you, his chosen ones.
All right, I love this next one, which is trying to characterize how flat and how smooth and how, not messed up your linear rails are. And that's actually more of a difficult problem than you think. And this project drives that home by using a camera, and I guess it's an encoder wheel. It's really used as more like a fiducial. And you strap the camera to the slider on your linear rails, and you point it off, let's say, perpendicular to the travel of the rails. And on the wall, very near the camera lens, you put some type of pattern on there. You run your rail and you record it, and then you use stabilization software to tell you from frame to frame what things changed. And you can get a ton of information on this. You get the pan X, the pan Y, the rotation, and the zoom from frame to frame, which then can be graphed. This project by Salius Luxi does just that, and I would think that this is something that would be difficult to do manually, Elliot, just because there's so many degrees of freedom that you're dealing with.
The thing's only moving in one, but then, right? I mean, he's only measuring one direction at a time?
Yeah, but if you think about it, so you have two linear rails with an Acme screw in between them, right?
Yeah.
So those rails, you could have one that is angled compared to
Right.
the other, so it would like introduce a twist
Yeah,
into it.
sure.
I suppose you could have them be like narrower on one end than the other, but that would be easy to figure out. You could have the rail itself be twisted so that it's slightly higher on one end, on
Yep.
one side of one
Yep.
end. I mean, there's just all kinds of things. So I'm not a machinist. I am enthusiastic about machinists who make high level YouTube videos that I can then watch as a hobby. So I would think that like this old Tony does a lot of work with that flat slab, the granite inspection surface, and like a micrometer, so that you can like go along one of these linear rails and you can
Right.
see where it's high and where it's low. But then characterizing like one rail versus the other rail becomes a little bit more difficult. The other thing is someone in the comments mentioned that you can actually find out, if you have the screw binding at some point, it's going to translate to like a shake in the camera itself, which then the software is going to pick up.
The coolest thing is the software it uses, Virtual Dub and its D-Shaker plugin, are like so old that they don't just stabilize the video for you. Instead, they tell you how they would stabilize the video for you. And that's kind of what makes this work, right? Is that it's giving out the data that then a secondary image stabilizer would use to stabilize it.
Yeah, and I think the only thing I've forgotten to say is the word odometry, which is the act of using an image like this to measure characterize your device.
All right, this next project is one of those crazy mechanical projects that looks like it's impossible. This is Active Ball Joint Uses Spherical Gear. This is a research project out of 2 Japanese universities. The gimmick here is that a ball is driven so that it can rotate in place in any direction. And it does this by having spherical gears cut into it, 2 of them at 90 degrees. And the only way to imagine what this like porcupine looks like is to think of a regular gear flat on the table and then rotate that not around its normal gear rotating axis, but around, from one of the sides to the other side. And watch that shape that it traces out. It's going to have the teeth going all the way around like the equator and then kind of circles at the poles. So you've got the sphere that has kind of lines drawn all over it, like latitude lines. Then you have to rotate the thing and do that again on the other side, 90 degrees to that. And so where these things would be rings around it intersect each other, it makes these like spikes. But these spikes are actually all parts of rings that then fit in with the gears that drive it. And I actually don't know which part of it is more amazing when you watch their video, the way this crazy spiky ball moves or the way the gears that drive it have to move.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about this is that it just can move in any direction. Like it's not just like up, down, left, and right, but then it can spin too.
Yeah, because the gears driving it not only turn it like in the normal gear direction, but they can also pivot. And the mechanism to make them do this is astounding, but that means the ball can turn, like Mike said, in all possible ways. It's really crazy. Is it good for anything? The end of the video, they put a rod into this ball and it can move around kind of a hemisphere completely unobstructed. And that's really cool. And there must be some use for this particular movement.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's super cool. And it's cool enough that John Robinson has already started working on 3D prints of this himself. And I'll throw the links in the show notes. You should follow his work. He's got 3D models anyway for the same thing that the Japanese crew have done. I don't think he's made it yet, but I do think that we will be able to see a working hacker model of this thing fairly soon. So go follow his work.
Well, I don't think there's any way to make a double jointed C-3PO without this joint. Like you got to put one of these. It to me, it's exactly what the human shoulder joint is, except for our locomotion is strapped to the outside.
Yeah,
and this is locomotion from the inside.
And that's the really weird part, is that it's like our ultra shoulder or something. It's like I don't know what it is.
In Johnny Mnemonic, this is going to be one of the upgrades that you can have. Just get rid of your tendons in your shoulder and just put one of these in.
I think that's also actually its weakness, is that it has to be driven from the inside, from the ball, and so it doesn't have much torque. But I don't think that's what this thing is about.
My first quick hacks, PetBot, turn pet bottles into filament. This is a project by JRT3D that can take those green plastic soda bottles and turn them into green plastic filament for your 3D printer. It's a 2-step process. It uses something like a razor knife to pull little strands like gift wrap ribbon of plastic off of these bottles. And then the second step, you feed that ribbon into a hot end that pushes out beautiful cylindrical filament. Next up, Garage Semiconductor Fab gets reactive ion etching upgrade. This is checking in on Sam Zaloof, who you may remember from a few years ago was making really complex semiconductor chips in his garage. And that really hadn't been done before. Well, now he's made a major upgrade to the equipment that he has on hand of this. And there's a video where he walks you through all of it. Mechanical 7-segment display uses a single motor. This is a project from Greg Zumwalt to make a 7-segment display that is mechanical and uses one motor. I mean, it's exactly what it's advertised to be. I like it because the mechanism that makes sure that you can go 0 through 9 on this one segment is just a really interesting engineering challenge. And I'm going to sneak in an extra one since we're talking about this mechanical display and talk about James Bruton's mechanical flip dot display. It uses one motor mechanism on the back to flip all of the dots, and this proof of concept is like a 5x3 row of them. The dots, he wanted to make them out of ping pong balls, but the mechanism was a little bit too difficult to pack into a tight space, so he 3D printed hemispheric ping pong balls and gets a great effect out of it.
All right, my first quick hack this week answers the burning question, just how vulnerable to accidental erasure are EEPROMs anyway? Adrian of Adrian's Digital Basement has a bunch of retro computers that take these old UV erasable EEPROMs, and they usually have stickers over the little erasure window. And some of his had foil and some of his had paper, and he was wondering how safe the paper ones were. So he put them and a control EEPROM into an EEPROM eraser and let it go for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. He ended up leaving it in there for 10 hours, and the ones with paper didn't erase. 10 hours in a dedicated EEPROM eraser. Paper probably works just fine. Next up, electric RC plane flies for almost 11 hours. This is a piece of crazy RC engineering by Matthew Heiskill. 10 hours, 45-minute flight in which he covered 340 miles, 550 kilometers, with a plane that weighs nearly 3 kilograms, 6 and a bit pounds. Most of that weight is its battery. This is only possible due to having an extremely efficient plane and using lithium-ion batteries, which have a lot more power per weight than the traditional lithium polymer batteries, which can put out more juice all at once. The other thing that absolutely makes this doable is ArduPilot, because there's no way you would want to fly that plane for 11 hours in a big circle. You have to have an autopilot do it for you. And last up, a sweet science experiment measuring Planck's constant with LEDs and a DMM. Poblocky 1982 uses the fact that the energy necessary to generate a photon is proportional to its wavelength and lights up LEDs until he can just barely see that they're on, and uses this plus a voltage meter plugged into the circuit to figure out the LED's threshold voltage, and does this over a range of wavelengths and uses this to calculate Planck's constant. Pretty cool demo, pretty good physics, and he gets within 11% of the right answer. I think for LEDs off the shelf where the manufacturer just tells you what they think the color is, that's a pretty good job.
It's time for the Can't Miss Articles of the Week. This is long-form content written by excellent Hackaday writers, and I chose one by Jenny List called The Great Windows 11 Computer Extinction Experiment. Elliot, I believe you are a lifelong Linux user, as am I. Should we talk about Windows for a while?
Let's do. I know some Windows users.
The thing is, I used to use Windows. It was not until 2005 that I decided to pick up the Linux mantle. But in that time, I've kind of forgotten how to use it, to the point where like my wife has a Windows machine and every once in a while I have to do something on there. I'm like, whoa, where is stuff on here? So I guess from that perspective, I'm kind of like the common person for looking at the switch from Windows 10 to Windows 11. In this case, it's the requirements, the system's requirements that they chose, and the effect that that might have in the world that Jenny has latched onto for this. And I'm not sure how I feel about this one. So on the one hand, if you're running Windows 10, they've committed to upgrades or at least security patches through 2025. So you can kind of keep using that equipment for a while. On the other hand, the requirements that they have put in place nope out of a lot of CPUs. So for instance, I checked both of the machines that I regularly use that I think are fine and run really well, and I think they're both from 2017, which isn't too old. But one of them has a Ryzen 5 1600 in it, not supported by Windows 11.
Obsoleted.
And then the other one is an Intel 7th generation, so i7 7Y75. So both the 6th generation and the 7th generation Intel chips are unsupported by Windows 11. And those are I believe those are the Skylake and Kaby Lake code names, which Kaby Lake doesn't seem that old to me, but I mean, I guess time marches on and I missed it. At the same time, if I were running Windows on any of those, Windows 10 would be supported for another 4 years, and then that would make those chips 7 years old. I guess I could see that. What's your take on this?
I can't see that at all, but that's okay. Like, this was one of the things that the old Linux diehards used to bat on about in the bad old days was the Wintel monopoly, right? Where Intel would push out new chips and Windows would make their operating system bloatier so that it would require these new chips. And I don't know if there was ever any kind of proven collusion there, but I do think there kind of was it's hard to say there's malice there. It's definitely they were both kind of driving each other. And then we saw kind of a pause from that for the last decade or so, and this looks like it's starting up again. It looks like they're going to start pushing out software that will drive hardware. And I don't think that's particularly good. I guess especially since, in my perspective, the hardware has been relatively static over the last 10 years. I mean, it used to be that a computer was unusably slow in 2 years or 3 years, and now it really is more like 10 years. So in that sense, I think the 7-year lifespan on your stuff is looking a little short.
I think the last time I made an upgrade to my battle station, I had been using the hardware for 11 years. Is that even possible?
That's awesome. Well, I mean, I'm using, as are a bunch of our listeners, I'm sure, an old ThinkPad laptop from, how old is an X220?
But
but it's got an Intel i7 core in it. It runs at 3 gigahertz. It doesn't have quite enough memory, but and the battery life isn't as good as the modern ones. But other than that, it keeps pace, but it wouldn't run Windows 11 either.
Yeah, so Windows 11 is going to require 1 gigahertz and 2 cores and a 64-bit architecture at the minimum.
That doesn't strike me as exceptional at all.
No.
Even the low-end Atoms have 1 gigahertz, 2 cores, and run 64 bits. That's like a Raspberry Pi. I mean, this is not a problem.
Yeah, and I think the Ryzen that I'm using, it has 6 cores, 12 threads on it.
Right.
So and it's the speed, and it's 64-bit. So I don't know why they can't compile Windows 11 for that. So it could be some other problem. There is another requirement that is you need to have a trusted platform module, a TPM module, which I don't even know what that was when they said it. And so I went and looked it up. It's like a dedicated security chip that's got some cryptographic keys on it and can generate trusted entropy out of it. So it's something to do with encrypting your data for whatever purpose to keep you secure.
Nobody knows what's inside of them, but it's trusted. And you have to realize that trusted is a bad word in computer security. In computer security, trusted means this is the thing you must trust. Not this is the thing that's trustworthy, but this is the thing that unfortunately is a source of trust in the system. And the fact that it's a black box to us, well, the rantier could imagine that instead of a good random number generator in there, there's a pseudo random number generator and the key is held by evil forces. I don't think that's actually the case here, but I don't know that it isn't either. TPMs.
Well, of course, all the rage these days is for the good business for bad people is in scalping electronic goods. So, it's been impossible to get, I think it's the 3080, I may have that wrong, but the NVIDIA graphics cards, they're the most powerful now. And apparently there's a big market in buying all of the stock up and then selling them back at a huge markup. Well, guess what? Now that this has been announced, your ability to get a TPM module aftermarket has become much more difficult. And the theory is that a bunch of scalpers are buying these up, and because they know that if you want to upgrade and you have a processor that's supported but not a TPM module, you need an aftermarket one. And now they've cornered the market in those. People will play games, I guess.
Did you hear about, there was something, I don't know if it was rumors or if it was substantiated, about requirement for webcams?
I saw, yeah. So Jenny reported about that on here, and it's a Windows Central article that they need a front webcam on the laptop. I don't know. Have you ever bought a laptop that doesn't have a front webcam? I mean, maybe you have, yes. But
do I want a creepy operating system manufacturer that's known to put a little bit excessive telemetry on the device to require me to have a forward-facing camera?
I mean, try to buy a laptop without a forward-facing camera. I think this is a red herring.
Actually, I do have one of the old X220s doesn't have a forward-facing camera, and that's the one I bought new, and I just wasn't willing to pony up for it because I'm too cheap. But all my used ones have had cameras, and they're totally useless and lousy. But they must be good for something, and that would be spying on me.
We'll see. I think another interesting question from the comments is, are you going to be able to run Windows 11 in a virtual machine? And that's used by a ton of people. Like if you don't run Windows, but you're doing work where people might run your product on Windows, you need a way to test it. And so oftentimes you run a virtual machine. You can run it with whatever operating system you have. It sets up like a sandbox, and inside of that sandbox, Windows runs happily, thinking it's on its own hardware, none the wiser.
That solves all the problems.
There's got to be a way to do that. I wouldn't think that they would make an operating system that you couldn't do that with, because do they charge licensing fees when you run Windows in a VM? They must.
Of course they do.
So there's a whole revenue stream there that they wouldn't want to get rid of. So I think the news is a little bit early on this. To me, the more real thing to think about is, what's the average user going to do? And my feeling is the average user is, even if they have hardware that's supported, they're not going to upgrade. They're going to get new hardware. They're going to be like, I'm just going to get a new computer that already has it installed. And so whether or not they put these restrictions out there, when you have the world's predominant operating system come out with a major release like this, I think you're going to see a lot of hardware that would have been fine end up being thrown out or sent to recycler, wherever it ends up going, in favor of the new one, and that's not great.
Or it's going to end up a debacle. No one is going to upgrade to Windows 11, and they're all going to run insecure, unpatched versions of Windows 10 for the infinite future. Because if you remember the problems they had going from Windows 7, I guess nobody wanted to get on Windows 8, and then they skipped 9, went straight to 10, and we're basically twisting everybody's arm to get them to shift from 7 to 10 so that they could finally stop supporting Windows 7. I wonder if that's going to happen here, but the extra financial cost of having to also upgrade your hardware is going to make people even more reluctant to leave 10 for 11.
Hear, hear.
All right, this week I picked a lighthearted article. Christina Panos's "You Can't Put Toothpaste Back in the Tube, but It Used to Be Easier." This is a look at the toothpaste tube and how life was before toothpaste tubes and what we can do to make toothpaste tubes better recyclable. And the thing that I didn't know is that in a lot of places, toothpaste tubes are aluminum on the inside and with a plastic sheet on the outside. And that makes them not recyclable as either plastic or aluminum, which is a bummer. So instead, you would want to make them out of either pure plastic or pure aluminum. I don't know. There's this story about Toms of Maine and their aluminum ones getting crinkly and tearing and stuff like that. First world problems. But
people didn't like that.
But the consumer did not like having crinkly tubes. They wanted their plastic in there, making it smooth. But then you can't squeeze the plastic ones the same. I don't know. Anyway, it was fun to read the history of this. Toothpaste used to be sold in kind of tubes. I mean, they're cylinders, but they're not like squeezable tubes like you're thinking of. They're just like cylinders, and you could scoop the toothpaste out. My grandfather actually used to use this funny, was it Colgate? I don't know, but it was a tooth powder instead of a toothpaste. And you would wet the toothbrush and you would shake this like tooth powder onto it. This was when I was a kid. It was super old-timey and retro then. I can't imagine anyone else in the world was using tooth powder in the mid-'80s.
But why? I mean, is there really secret sauce in there other than what would be in the powder?
No, of course not.
Yeah,
it's
and
exactly
then it would
the
ship so
same.
much better too, right? Because you're not shipping the weight of whatever liquid is in there.
Oh yeah, and tooth powder comes in these awesome like tin cans. It was like these little ovally shaped tin, like it was like a hip flask or something.
Yeah.
Dude, that was rad.
Well, and then Christina was talking about how when it used to come that way, then you would have a glass container that you would just keep mixing, like every morning you just mix it up in there. And that I can imagine you probably didn't wash it thoroughly in between
That sounds like a bad idea.
toothpaste mixings. Yeah, I don't know if you know, but there is bacteria inside of your mouth.
No, the tooth powder, you'd shake it onto the a wetted toothbrush and off you go.
Oh, okay, yeah.
He didn't make it or anything. He just shook it
Yeah.
on and, your mouth's full of water anyway. Scrub, yo.
I remember getting model airplane glue in those tin tubes.
Yeah, sure.
And, lead, right? So we're finding out that those are lead, and Christina talks about that. But you would think that they could just make it out of aluminum and recycle that. But then I know that tin foil, which is actually aluminum foil, I guess I call it colloquially tin foil, but aluminum foil is not recyclable in the recycling programs that I have here.
Oh, what?
And so maybe, yeah, it's not.
Oh.
And even like we have pretty good recycling for the US in Madison, I think. And I looked it up, and the options for dental products, so you can actually send them your empty toothpaste, your floss. I don't know if that's the case or the floss itself.
Okay.
And your old toothbrushes, you can mail them to TerraCycle for recycling, or there's like one dentist downtown that you can drop them off at, but you can't put them in the single stream recycling here.
Oh, that's bizarre.
I'm sorry to say, I throw them away.
Yeah,
And
sure, I would too.
And like, how many toothpaste tubes have you used in your life? Like that adds up. And, I wish that we could come up with like a reusable thing for it. So one of the things that they mention is you need to do some kind of lamination of the different types of plastic in order for it to roll up in a satisfying way so it doesn't like unroll itself. And that's what like this new thing that's coming out that's been announced by Colgate is going to have. And one of the things I added in editing on this article is I've seen those toothpaste rollers on 3D, like on Thingiverse, different 3D printing sites. Like, I think that we need to change consumer behavior, like develop the packaging that's going to create the least amount of waste and then provide a reusable part that makes the user experience good.
I have to say, this is a weird American thing because the toothpaste tubes here are all plastic and are all recyclable, where here is Germany. That does make it hard to get the last little bits of toothpaste out of the tube, and that's why you need to 3D print these like toothpaste squeezers.
We got to put in the show notes a picture of your Yoda head toothpaste cap.
Yeah, oh, totally.
Yeah, because I just think there's a lot of fun to be had around brushing teeth and, this ritual that is super imperative that you do it. And I think we have bad adoption of it. And, if we kind of normalize all of the gear that's going in and like what we do with it and things that we can do better with it, I don't know. I think in general that will help dental hygiene across the board as well.
I'm for a return to tooth powder. Pass me my tooth powder spoon and my monocle.
What did you do for flossing before nylon was invented?
My wife actually bought some hippie string floss, and it's totally fine. It's some
like,
organic cotton blah blah floss, and it's just the same, dude.
It's the silk out of the ears of corn.
I think
Normally they get stuck in your teeth, but you can floss with them.
Straight out of the silkworm's butt.
That's all the time we have for this episode of the Hackaday podcast. As always, we'd love to hear from you. You can leave a comment in the show notes, which you'll find at hackaday.com/podcast. You can email us, editor@hackaday.com. We live and die by the tips that you send us, so if you do something cool or you've seen something cool, we want to hear about it. Tips@hackaday.com. And until next time,
keep on hacking. You were just waiting till I said something dumb to
I
do
knew
the
you would say a
rollout.
good one. I'm like, that is it.
God
right
damn it.
there, silkworm's butt.
You start here.
I thought I heard a servo motor.
Test my backups. Oh, what the heck's the name of it? How did I not put the...
I'm always cracking jokes. I feel bad sometimes, but then I'm like, eh.